Salt spray was a constant, cold kiss against my face, a familiar sting that did little to wake the dead parts of me. 3 days out. 3 days from anything resembling solid ground, from the suffocating weight of my own making. The rhythmic groan of the ship, a behemoth of steel and cargo, was the only lullaby I'd known for weeks. I traced the condensation on the grimy porthole with a calloused fingertip, the blurred lights of the distant coast, a taunting mirage. Disgrace. That's what they called it. A polite word for a life's work dissolving into the ether, for a ghost that still whispered my name in the dead of night. It tasted like ash, much like everything else these days. The detective agency I'd once envisioned, a beacon of justice in the city's murky depths, was now just a forgotten sign above a boarded-up storefront, a monument to my hubris. I'd traded my badge for a bottle, my reputation for a quiet, gnawing regret. Then, the message. A single encrypted line, delivered by a courier who looked like he'd wrestled a bear and lost. It wasn't a plea for help, not directly. It was a notification. A stark, clinical report of a heist, not just any heist. The language used, the precision described, it snagged something deep within me, a forgotten nerve ending that had long since gone numb. The report detailed the theft of rare artifacts from a private collector's vault. No forced entry, no alarms tripped. The security system, state-of-the-art, bypassed with an almost surgical elegance. The method, a sophisticated manipulation of atmospheric pressure, a technique so obscure, so familiar, my breath hitched. The phantom limb of my past, the one I'd tried so desperately to sever, twitched. I leaned back, the worn leather of my chair creaking in protest. The details in the report were like shards of glass, each one reflecting a piece of a nightmare I'd buried deep. The precise timing, the calculated movements, the sheer audacity. It was him or someone who knew him. My mind, a cluttered attic of forgotten faces and unsolved riddles, began to stir. I saw the chalk outlines, the sterile white sheets, the bewildered faces of uniformed officers, and I saw his work. A man I'd hunted for years, a phantom who danced just beyond my grasp, leaving a trail of broken lives and unanswered questions. Now that respectability was shattered, along with his priceless collection. The report mentioned a specific piece, a Renaissance-era astronomical clock, its intricate gears and celestial markers a testament to a bygone era of precision. Since that night began to seep into my bones, this wasn't just a string of coincidences. This was a deliberate echo, a taunt. He was back, or his ghost was, and he was playing a game I knew all too well. My fingers, no longer trembling, were now steady as they tapped out a reply, a coded message to a contact buried deep within the city's underbelly. Information. I needed information. The usual channels were dry, choked by the very corruption I'd once fought against. But there were others. I pulled out an old map, its creases worn thin from countless hours of study. The heist had taken place in a seemingly impregnable penthouse overlooking the harbor. But the report mentioned something else, something I'd almost overlooked. A small, almost insignificant detail. A ventilation shaft, accessible only from the building's service tunnels, a network of forgotten passages that snaked beneath the city. It was a detail that screamed his name. The salt spray still misted the window, but now it felt less like a kiss and more like a warning. The past wasn't just a ghost. It was a predator, and it had found me. And the hunt, the one I'd thought was over, had just begun again. The tension in the air was palpable, a coiled spring waiting to snap. This wasn't about catching a thief. This was about confronting a demon, my demon, and this time I wouldn't let him slip away. The ship churned onward, a silent promise of returning to the city that held my failure, and now my second chance. The cargo ship Hold, 3 days from port, was a cathedral of shadows, each hulking container a stained glass window into a world of transience. The air hung thick with the ghosts of distant lands, brine and diesel, yes, but also something else, something sharp and metallic that snagged in my throat. I ran a gloved hand over the cold steel of a crate, the rough texture a welcome anchor in the disorienting sway of the vessel. 3 days. It felt like a lifetime or perhaps a mere breath before the plunge. A gruff cough echoed from the deeper gloom. I didn't turn. My instincts, dulled by years of forced dormancy, still hummed a low, wary tune. The detective, a man whose face was a roadmap of exhaustion etched by too many late nights and too little sleep, emerged from behind a towering stack of pallets. His eyes, the color of weak coffee, scanned me with a practiced, almost weary assessment. Still poking around, Cole, he asked, his voice a gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate through the metal deck. Nothing for you here, just cargo. I finally turned, letting my gaze drift over him. He was a ghost too in his own way, especially when it smells like opportunity. He snorted, a sound devoid of humor. Opportunity for what? To get myself killed? This ain't my jurisdiction anymore. It never was, not truly, I countered, stepping closer to a particular crate. It was unmarked, unlike the others that bore shipping labels and destination codes. Just a plain, unvarnished steel box. This is where the real work happens, isn't it? In the spaces between the official reports. I tapped a finger against its side, a faint, almost imperceptible vibration, not from the ship. It was too localized, too deliberate. I checked this one. The detective sighed, the sound a weary exhalation of stale air. We checked them all. Standard procedure, nothing out of the ordinary. Standard procedure misses the extraordinary, I murmured, my eyes tracing a faint scratch near the seam of the crate. It looked fresh. Too fresh. Did I see this? I pointed. He squinted, leaning in. A scratch, so what? Happens all the time in transit. But this isn't transit damage, I insisted, my pulse quickening, a familiar, unwelcome sensation. Look at the angle and the depth, it's precise. I knelt, my movements economical, the years of training kicking in like an old, rusty engine finally turning over. The scratch wasn't random. It was a mark, a signature. A signature. The detective scoffed. I rest seeing things, Cole, the pressure's getting to eye. Maybe I conceded standing up, or maybe I'm seeing what I not allowed to see, what I don't want to see. I looked at the crate again, then at the others, a growing unease prickling my skin. The pattern, it was too familiar. The meticulous planning, the almost arrogant precision, it echoed. These heists, I began, my voice dropping, they're too clean, too coordinated. Like a single hand moving pieces on a board. That's the job, Cole, professional crews, they're good. Good is one thing, I said, my gaze locking onto his. But this is artistry, a specific kind of artistry, the kind I thought I'd buried. I let the words hang in the air, heavy with unspoken history. The serial killer. The one I'd chased for years, the one who had slipped through my fingers like smoke. The detective's face tightened. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, recognition, perhaps, or a deeply buried fear. That was a different time, Cole. The scratch, it was the key. It's all logged. Standard procedure. And standard procedure is what landed me here, isn't it? I gestured vaguely at my surroundings, at the life I'd been forced to abandon. Tell me about the crew. Anyone new? Anyone with unusual skills? The detective shifted his weight, his boots scraping against the metal. There was a new stevedore, quiet type, kept to himself. Name was, I don't recall, didn't make an impression. Didn't make an impression, I repeated, the words tasting like ash. That was the problem. The ones who made no impression were often the ones who left the deepest scars. The quiet stevedore. A picture, fragmented and terrifying, began to form in the murky depths of my mind. This wasn't just about stolen goods. This was a message. A taunt. And I was the only one who could read it. The investigation had begun, not with a badge, but with a scar. The air in the cargo ship hold, 3 days from port, hung thick and heavy, a damp blanket woven from brine and the ghosts of 1,000 voyages. My flashlight beam cut a jagged swath through the gloom, illuminating stacks of crates that loomed like silent sentinels. The stench of diesel fuel mingled with something else, something metallic and faintly sweet. A scent that clawed at the edges of my memory. It was the scent of things left undone, of answers that slipped through my fingers like water. I traced the faint scuff marks on the concrete floor, a breadcrumb trail leading me nowhere I wanted to go. This was where they'd brought the stolen goods, the jewels and untraceable bearer bonds lifted from the gallery. The precision of it all gnawed at me. No alarms tripped. No witnesses, just an empty vault and a whisper of expertly applied force. It was a ghost's work, and the ghost was starting to feel very, very familiar. My phone buzzed, the sharp sound a violation of the oppressive quiet. A text from a former colleague, a uniformed officer whose loyalty was as unwavering as his belief in the system I'd so spectacularly failed. I need to see this, Cole. Downtown bank, same M.O. but bigger. Bigger. The word echoed in the cavernous space. Bigger meant more risk, more exposure. Bigger meant they were getting bolder. The city lights, usually a comfort, now seemed like accusatory eyes. The bank, a monolithic structure of steel and glass, was already a hive of activity. Flashing blue and red lights painted strobing patterns on its polished facade, a macabre dance against the night sky. Uniformed officers, their faces grim and set, moved with a practiced urgency. No one challenged me. They knew me. Or at least, they knew the ghost of who I used to be. A disgraced detective with a reputation as tarnished as old silver. They tolerated my presence, a morbid curiosity, perhaps, or a grudging respect for the fact that I was the only one who saw the pattern before it became a raging inferno. The bank manager, a man whose tailored suit seemed to shrink under the weight of the circumstances, wrung his hands. His voice, a reedy tremor, outlined the night's devastation. They bypassed every security measure. Laser grids, pressure plates, motion sensors, nothing. It's as if they weren't even there. I walked through the shattered vault, the air still thick with the scent of ozone, the acrid tang of something electrical overloaded. The main vault door, a behemoth of reinforced steel, hung ajar, a gaping maw, not forced open but unlocked. The tumblers, intricate and precise, had been manipulated with a skill that bordered on the supernatural. My gaze fell on a discarded tool lying innocently on the floor. It wasn't something you'd find in any locksmith's kit. It was too precise, too specialized. I picked it up, the cool metal a stark contrast to the heat of my rising apprehension. This was more than just a series of heists. This was a statement, a terrifyingly familiar statement. A detective, his face etched with exhaustion, approached me. His uniform was crisp, his demeanor professional, but his eyes held a flicker of something I recognized, a desperate need for answers. "Cole," he acknowledged, the name a reluctant sigh. "We heard you might be sniffing around." "Sniffing around for what?" I asked, my voice low, deliberately casual. "For the ghost," he said, his gaze sharp. "The one who's been making a name for himself, the one who leaves no trace." I turned the tool over in my hand, its intricate design a puzzle I was beginning to solve. "He's not a ghost," I murmured, the words barely audible. "He's just very, very good at disappearing." The detective's brow furrowed. "You've seen something, haven't you?" I met his gaze, the weight of my past pressing down on me. "I've seen a pattern," I admitted. This wasn't just about catching a thief anymore. This was about confronting a monster I'd already wrestled with, a monster that had nearly broken me. The city was in danger, and the shadow of my past was lengthening, threatening to consume me whole. The quiet stevedore, the gallery heist, the bank, they were all pieces of a terrifying mosaic, and I was the only one seeing the whole picture. The air in the cargo ship hold, 3 days from port, hung thick and cloying, a metallic tang of brine and something else, something like old oil and desperation. My flashlight beam, a wavering ghost in the oppressive dark, danced across stacks of crates, each a silent sentinel guarding secrets. The chill seeped through my worn leather jacket, a constant, unwelcome companion, not the natural quiet of a slumbering vessel, but a heavy, expectant hush, as if the very air held its breath. The detective, a man whose eyes held a perpetual flicker of suspicion, had been a dead end, his leads as dry as a desert bone. My boots crunched on a scattering of what looked like coarse sand, out of place amidst the polished metal and rough wood. I swept the light across the deck. More of it. And then a glint, a small tarnished silver locket half buried in the gritty residue. My breath hitched. I knelt, my gloved fingers brushing away the sand. It was intricately engraved, a swirling pattern that felt eerily familiar. I pried it open. Inside, 2 faded photographs. A pang, sharp and unexpected, pierced through me. This wasn't just a trinket lost by a careless thief. It felt personal. I stood, the locket clutched in my palm. The heists, the meticulous planning, the uncanny precision, the sheer audacity. It all screamed of a singular mind, a ghost from my own nightmares. The jeweler's vault, the art gallery, the private collection, each target had been stripped bare, not just of valuables, but of specific, seemingly insignificant items. A single, uncut diamond from the jeweler, a specific, unsigned sketch from the gallery, a rare, pre-war coin from the collector. Not the most valuable pieces, the ones that resonated with a particular, almost obsessive focus. My mind churned, sifting through the debris of years. I remembered the serial killer I'd hunted, the one who'd vanished into the city's underbelly, leaving a trail of fear and unanswered questions. His signature wasn't blood, but absence. He took things that held meaning, not monetary value. He collected fragments, pieces of a shattered narrative. The sand continued, a thin, consistent layer, like a deliberate trail. I found more, a single worn leather glove, too small for any of the burly dockworkers I'd seen earlier. A crumpled piece of parchment, smelling faintly of aged ink and lavender, bearing a cryptic symbol I couldn't quite place. yet it stirred a deep unease within me. It was a language I felt I should know, a melody just beyond my hearing. Then the distinct scent of ozone, sharp and acrid, prickled my nostrils. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. I'd smelled it before, in the aftermath of a particular incident, a case I'd buried, along with a significant piece of myself. My gaze fell upon a large, canvas-covered object tucked away in a corner, almost an afterthought in the vastness of the hold. It was roughly the size of a small safe. A low hum emanated from beneath the canvas, a subtle vibration that I felt more than heard. My hand, steady despite the tremor in my gut, reached out and pulled back the heavy fabric. It was a contraption of gleaming brass and intricate clockwork, a bizarre fusion of old-world craftsmanship and something alien. Gears whirred softly, tiny lights pulsed with an internal rhythm, and at its center a single empty pedestal. The ozone smell was strongest here, emanating from the device itself. It was active. This wasn't just a series of heists. This was a scavenger hunt. And the prize, whatever it was being assembled here, piece by painstaking piece. The items taken, the specificities, the cryptic symbol, they were all part of a design. A morbid, intricate tapestry woven by a mind that delighted in precision and symbolism. I turned the locket over in my hand, the tarnished silver cool against my skin. The faces within seemed to mock me, remnants of a life I'd failed to protect. The man in the photograph, was he the collector or something more? The symbol on the parchment. It was a stylized knot, an impossible intertwining of lines. I'd seen it before, etched into the doorframe of a derelict warehouse, a place I'd investigated years ago, a place that held the stench of something deeply wrong. A floorboard creaked somewhere in the vastness of the hold. My head snapped up, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The pieces were starting to connect, but the picture they formed was more terrifying than anything I could have imagined. This wasn't just about a killer from my past. This was about a killer who had learned, who had evolved, and who was now orchestrating a symphony of destruction that was just beginning. The question clawed at me, what was the grand finale, and who would be the final victim? The stale air of the cargo ship hold, 3 days from port, clung to me like a shroud. 3 days. 3 days until this floating tomb docked, and whatever secrets it harbored would spill onto the unsuspecting city streets. My flashlight beam. A nervous tremor swept across a tableau of forgotten cargo. Rust gnawed at the edges of metal containers, their stenciled markings faded ghosts of provenance. The brine-soaked wood of crates seemed to weep, each droplet a tiny echo of the sea's endless lament. And then a glint, not the dull sheen of metal, but a sharp, deliberate spark. My breath hitched. I moved closer, my footsteps muffled by the thick, oil-stained floor. It was a small, tarnished silver locket, nestled in the shadow of a heavy canvas tarp. My fingers, clumsy with a sudden surge of apprehension, pried it open. Inside, faded and creased, was a photograph. A woman's face, young, her eyes holding a flicker of defiance. A face I knew. A face I hadn't seen in years, not since the whispers stopped, not since the terror supposedly went dormant. My mind raced, piecing together fragments, the phantom threads of a case I'd tried to bury. The locket. It wasn't just a trinket. It was a breadcrumb, a deliberate placement, but by whom and why now? The meticulous precision of the heists, the chilling echoes of the past, it all pointed to a single, terrifying possibility. He was back, or someone was wearing his mask. A low creak from the far end of the hold snapped me back to the present. My senses strained, the rhythmic groan of the ship's engines a counterpoint to the frantic thrumming in my own chest. I could hear it now, a faint shuffling, the scrape of something heavy being dragged, not the sound of rats. This was deliberate. The scent of old oil intensified, laced with a new, acrid odor, something chemical. My gut twisted. This wasn't just about stolen goods. This was a stage, a carefully constructed trap. The shuffling grew louder, closer. I flattened myself against a stack of crates, the rough wood a comforting, if gritty, presence against my back. A figure emerged from the gloom, silhouetted against the faint light filtering through a grimy porthole. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with a fluid economy that spoke of practiced stealth. He carried a heavy canvas bag, its contents shifting with each step. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This was it. I could feel the weight of years, of failures pressing down on me. I had to know. I had to see if the phantom I'd chased had finally materialized. "Hold it right there," I said, my voice a rasp that felt alien in the cavernous space. The figure froze, then slowly he turned. The meager light caught his face, or rather the absence of it. He wore a mask, not a crude Halloween affair, but something crafted, seamless, a blank, featureless expanse that offered no hint of identity. It was distorted, electronically altered. The cadence, the subtle lilt of memories, of regrets. He gestured with the canvas bag. This, for instance, is quite the souvenir. I squinted, trying to make out the contents of the bag. Beneath the worn canvas, I could see the glint of metal. Not just any metal, tools. Specialized tools. I am simply a successor, an admirer of my previous work, detective. A successor, the implications slammed into me like a physical blow. Not him, but someone who had learned from him. Someone who had taken his twisted legacy and refined it. The heists, the pattern, the meticulous planning. It wasn't just a copy, it was an evolution. Why now? I pressed, my voice tight. Why this ship? What are I after? He took a step closer, the canvas bag swinging slightly. The same thing we always are, Cole, a clean slate, a new beginning, and this is merely the first step. He reached into the bag, my hand tightened on my weapon. This was the moment of truth, or the moment of my undoing. But instead of a weapon, he pulled out a small, polished wooden box. He held it out to me. A gift, detective, for old time's sake. My eyes darted from the box to his masked face, then back. Confusion warred with suspicion. What is this? A reminder, the voice said, of what I lost, of what I failed to protect. With a sudden, jarring movement, he hurled the box. It flew through the air, not at me, but past me, striking the metal hull of a nearby container with a sharp crack. The lid sprang open. Inside, nestled on velvet lining, was a single tarnished brass key. It was the key to the old lockbox. The lockbox I'd kept hidden, the one containing the evidence that had been deemed insufficient, the evidence that had allowed him to walk free the first time. I was alone again, the acrid scent of chemicals still hanging in the air, the dull thud of my own heart the only sound. The locket lay forgotten on the floor. The wooden box, its contents spilled, marked me from the deck. The key, a small, innocuous object, represented a monumental setback. He hadn't just returned, he had orchestrated a betrayal of my own carefully guarded secrets. The past wasn't just haunting me, it was actively working against me, and I had just handed it the very weapon it needed to strike again. The clang of the brass key against the steel container echoed in the cavernous cargo ship hold, 3 days from port. It was a sharp, discordant note in the symphony of creaking metal and sloshing water that was the ship's heartbeat. My breath, ragged and shallow, misted in the cool, damp air. The velvet lining, once a cushion for something precious, now seemed to mock the tarnished object it cradled. A key, not just any key, but one etched with a familiar, almost forgotten pattern. It was the same intricate swirl I'd seen on the invitation to the gallery opening, the one that had led me to that desolate warehouse and the chilling tableau of the Ripper's artistry. This wasn't a random artifact. It was a breadcrumb deliberately placed, but by whom, and for what purpose? My gaze swept the immediate vicinity. The lights of the hold, strung haphazardly from the ceiling, cast long dancing shadows that distorted the stacked crates and coiled ropes. I'd been so focused on the box, on the sheer audacity of its placement, that I'd missed the subtle signs. The faint scent of ozone, like after a lightning strike, still hung in the air, a ghost of the electrical charge that must have been used to bypass the security. And the scuff marks near the vent, almost invisible against the grimy floor, suggested a hasty exit, not the calculated precision of the Ripper. The Ripper, the name itself was a scar on my past, a phantom limb that still ached. I'd chased him for years, a ghost in the machine, leaving behind a trail of broken lives and unsolved puzzles. And now, here I was, sniffing at his scent again, or at least, the scent of someone who wore his mask. I knelt, my worn leather gloves brushing against the rough concrete. The key pulsed with a silent significance. It wasn't about the stolen jewels or the untraceable bearer bonds. Those were merely the smoke, obscuring the real fire. The Ripper had never been about wealth. He'd been about control, about the art of the performance. He'd crafted each crime scene like a macabre masterpiece, leaving his signature not in blood, but in the meticulous arrangement of details, each one a taunt, a challenge. This key, it was a direct challenge. It unlocked something, but what? And why here in the belly of a ship bound for where? A quick glance at the manifest tacked to a nearby bulkhead confirmed my suspicion. a destination I'd never considered. It wasn't a port of call for the usual criminal enterprises. It was remote, isolated, a place where secrets could be buried deep. I stood, the key heavy in my palm. My mind, a tangled knot of past failures and present anxieties, began to untangle itself. The heists, the Ripper's modus operandi, the staged accidents, they weren't random acts of desperation. They were rehearsals, each one a step closer to a grand finale, and the motive, it wasn't greed. It was something far more personal. The Ripper had a vendetta, I knew that much, but against whom? The police force, the city that had failed to capture him, or something or someone far more specific. My eyes landed on a faded stencil on one of the crates, a stylized eagle, its wings outstretched. I'd seen that symbol before, not on a case file, but in a photograph of a younger me, standing beside a stern-faced man in a uniform. My father. He'd been a decorated officer, a man of principle, a man who had inspired my own career. The eagle was the insignia of his old precinct. This wasn't just about a serial killer's echo. This was about my past, my father's past. I took out my burner phone, the cracked screen reflecting the dim light. I scrolled through my contacts, my thumb hovering over a name I hadn't dialed in years. A former colleague, someone who still owed me a favor. Someone who knew the Ripper's file as well as I did. "It's Cole," I replied, my voice a low growl. "I need to pull up every piece of information I have on my father's final case, the one before the Ripper started his spree, and I mean everything, no stone unturned." As I waited for a reply, my gaze drifted back to the key. The tarnished brass gleamed faintly, a promise and a threat. The Ripper wasn't just taunting me with his methods. He was taunting me with my own history. He was forcing me to confront the ghost in my own machine. And this time, there would be no escape. The game had just changed, and I was no longer just the investigator. I was the target. The air in the cargo ship hold, 3 days from port, hung thick and heavy, a suffocating blanket woven from the scent of brine, damp metal, and something else, something acrid like burnt sugar. It clung to my tongue, a bitter reminder of how far I'd fallen, how deep I'd dug myself into this charade. The rhythmic groan of the ship's hull was a low, constant thrum against my bones, a heartbeat I couldn't ignore. I traced the intricate etchings on the key, the same swirling pattern that had adorned the Ripper's victims. Each loop, each sharp angle, felt like a whisper from the past, a spectral finger tracing the scars I carried. He was here. Not just his ghost, but the flesh and blood architect of my downfall, orchestrating this macabre dance from the shadows. The intel had been precise, a whisper in the digital wind, leading me to this floating tomb. A trap, no doubt, but one I had to walk into. A faint scrape echoed from the far end of the hold, near a towering stack of wooden crates bound with thick rope. My hand instinctively moved to the worn leather of my shoulder holster, the familiar weight, a small comfort. I moved with a deliberate slowness, each footfall cushioned by the groaning deck. My eyes scanned the cavernous space, my senses stretched taut, straining against the gloom. A stack of coiled wire became a coiled serpent, a discarded tarpaulin, a hunched figure. Then a glint. It was tucked beneath the lip of a crate, almost hidden. I knelt, my breath catching in my throat. It was a photograph face down. My fingers, calloused and trembling slightly, turned it over. The image seared itself into my mind. But that wasn't what made the blood drain from my face. Behind her, blurred but unmistakable, was the silhouette of the Ripper. He had been there watching. He had always been watching. This wasn't about the heists anymore. This wasn't about the past. This was a declaration. He knew me. He knew where I lived, who I loved. And he was showing me just how vulnerable I was. The stakes, already impossibly high, had just become a chasm. Head snapped up, my focus narrowing. "Cole," the voice rasped like stones grinding together. "I knew you'd come." He held something in his hand, something that caught the light with a wicked gleam. It was a scalpel, its blade gleaming, impossibly clean. "You see, Cole," the stranger continued, his voice a low purr, "I admire your persistence. But persistence without understanding is just noise, and I've always hated noise." He gestured with the scalpel, a subtle flick of his wrist. "This little game of ours, you've been so focused on the moves, you've forgotten the player." My jaw tightened. "What do you want?" The words were a growl, raw and rough. He smiled, a slow, unsettling unfurling of his lips. I want to see if you can truly save anyone this time, or if you're just as broken as I suspected." He took a step closer, the scalpel still held loosely. "Your sister," such a lovely smile. Shame if it were to change. The words hit me like a physical blow. My breath hitched. He knew about Alina, the photograph, the taunt. It wasn't just about bringing him to justice anymore. It was about protecting the only family I had left, the only innocent soul left in this decaying world. You're playing with fire, I warned, my voice dangerously low. He laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. Fire, my dear Cole, I am fire. There's a package, a little surprise for you. Something to remind you of what's at stake. I didn't move. My mind raced, a frantic scramble for an angle and advantage. He was toying with me, drawing me in, making me react. It was the leverage he needed, the lever he was using to pry open my carefully constructed defenses. You won't get away with this, I said, the conviction in my voice a thin veneer over the churning panic. The stakes had not just been raised, they had been rewritten in blood. The salt-laced air, thick and heavy, clung to my skin like a shroud. Each labored breath tasted of brine and something metallic, something I couldn't quite place, a ghost of a scent that tickled the back of my throat. I was deep within the belly of the beast, the cavernous expanse of the cargo ship hold, 3 days from port. The low thrum of the engines was a constant, unsettling pulse beneath my feet, a reminder of how isolated I was, how utterly alone. He had chosen this place with a chilling precision. A labyrinth of steel containers, stacked high like metallic tombstones, casting long, distorted shadows in the dim, flickering emergency lights. The air was frigid, a stark contrast to the humid night I'd left behind. My hands, raw from wrestling with a stubborn latch earlier, felt clumsy as I adjusted the makeshift listening device. It was crude, cobbled together from a discarded walkie-talkie and a sensitive microphone I'd borrowed from a forgotten warehouse. The hope was that it would pick up any sound beyond the ship's own groaning symphony. I'd planted it near the main access hatch, a single point of entry he was sure to use. He was arrogant, this phantom, and arrogance was a weakness I knew intimately. But Alina, the thought of her bright laughter extinguished, was a brand on my soul. I couldn't let him win again, not this time. I saw the glint of a discarded tool, the oily sheen on a sealed crate. Endless rows of identical containers. He knew this ship, or at least he knew the type. The meticulous planning, the way he moved through the city's underbelly like a ghost, leaving no trace but the echo of his violence, it was all there. I remembered the first time I saw it, the eerie symmetry of the crime scene, the unnerving neatness. It was like a surgeon had operated, not a killer, faded. The official report had called it a delusion, a breakdown. They'd stripped me of my badge, my career, my credibility, but I knew better. A faint metallic scrape echoed from above. My head snapped up, my senses on high alert. It was too deliberate, too soft to be the ship settling. He was here. Footsteps, light and measured, descended the metal stairs leading into the hold. I held my breath, straining to hear. The footsteps paused, then moved, not directly towards my location, but in a wide, exploratory arc. He was cautious, assessing. Good. Let him think he had the upper hand. Then a voice, low and smooth, cut through the air. "Cole, are I here, detective?" The name, spoken with such casual familiarity, sent a shiver down my spine. It was a taunt, a confirmation of his knowledge, his control. "This is a dead end," I muttered to myself, the words a barely audible rasp. He wanted me here, exposed. This wasn't just a meeting, it was a meticulously planned stage for my downfall. The realization settled like a lead weight in my gut. I had walked right into it. My eyes darted, searching for an escape, a way to break free from this cage. The containers, once a source of concealment, now felt like prison walls. He hadn't revealed himself yet. He was playing with me, savoring the anticipation. He always did. A faint click, like a lock disengaging, echoed from my left. My head swiveled. A sliver of brighter light spilled out, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. He was inside. He had led me here to this specific container, to this specific moment. My hand tightened around the heavy wrench I'd tucked into my belt. It was a pathetic weapon against whatever he had planned, but it was all I had. This was it. The trap was sprung, and I, the disgraced detective, had willingly walked into its jaws. The irony was a bitter pill. I had come here to catch a monster, and instead, I had become the bait. I was deep within the belly of the beast, the cargo ship hold, 3 days from port. Shadows, vast and inky, swallowed the weak beam of my flashlight, turning the stacked crates into hulking, silent sentinels. The rhythmic groan of the ship's engines vibrated through the metal deck, a dull thrum against my ribs, a constant reminder of my isolation, my precarious position. My boots scraped against the grimy floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the oppressive quiet. I moved with a practiced stealth, a ghost in the machine, a phantom of my former life. The metallic tang in the air grew stronger, sharper now, mingling with the musty odor of damp canvas and aged wood. It was the scent of the killer, the one that had haunted my nightmares for years. The same scent that had clung to the abandoned warehouses, the desolate docks, the places where innocence had been systematically dismantled. A glint of light, far ahead, caught my eye. Not the steady glow of a utility lamp, but a flickering, unsteady flame. Curiosity, a dangerous companion I'd tried to shed, tugged me forward. I crept closer, my hand instinctively reaching for the worn leather grip of the pistol tucked into my waistband. The flame illuminated a small clearing amidst the towering stacks of cargo, a space carved out by deliberate design. And there, silhouetted against the dancing fire, was a figure. The posture was familiar, a certain stillness that spoke of immense control. My breath hitched. It couldn't be, not after all this time, not here. The figure turned slowly as if anticipating my arrival. But it was also something more. I stepped into the meager light, my flashlight beam steady now, cutting through the gloom. The perpetrator, the ghost, the architect of so much pain. He stood by a small, makeshift brazier, the flames licking upwards, casting an orange glow on the rough-hewn planks of the ship's hull. Scattered around him were tools, gleaming and precise, laid out with an almost surgical neatness. Surgical, the word sent a shiver down my spine. "I've been busy," I answered, my voice surprisingly steady, betraying none of the turmoil churning within me. He gave a low, humorless chuckle, "and I have been remarkably persistent." I almost admired my tenacity from a distance. Admired. The word tasted like ash. I destroyed lives. Destruction is a matter of perspective, Cole. I merely rearranged them, gave them a new form, a new purpose. He gestured to the tools with a flick of his wrist. Much like these, useless until applied with intent. My eyes scanned the area. Crates, yes, but not just any crates. These were marked with symbols I'd seen before, cryptic sigils etched into the wood, the same ones found at the scenes of the heists, the same ones that had been scrawled in the margins of the killer's cryptic notes. They weren't random, they were a language. "What is this?" I demanded, my gaze locking onto a large, metal-bound chest sitting beside him. It was complex, a series of tumblers and pressure plates that would have taken a specialist hours to bypass. But he made it look effortless, his movements fluid and precise. The click of the lock disengaging echoed in the vast space. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the steady thrum of the ship. This was it, the confrontation, the end of the chase. He slowly lifted the heavy lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, wasn't what I expected. No stolen jewels, no stacks of cash. It was a collection of artifacts, each one painstakingly crafted. Intricate clockwork mechanisms, delicate glass vials filled with iridescent liquids, and a single, perfectly preserved specimen of a rare, deep-sea bloom. They were beautiful, grotesque, and utterly alien. "I was looking for a killer," he responded, his voice soft, almost conversational. "But I was looking at the wrong things. The blood, the fear, those were merely byproducts. The true art was in the transformation." He picked up one of the clockwork devices, its gears whirring with an unnerving precision. "This," he explained, holding it out, "is not a weapon. It's a key, a catalyst. It unlocks potential." My mind reeled, the heists, the meticulous planning, the uncanny ability to bypass impossible security systems. It wasn't about greed, it was about acquisition, about gathering the components for this. "I ray insane," I breathed, the words catching in my throat. "Or perhaps I simply see the world as it truly is, a canvas waiting for a bolder brushstroke." He turned back to the chest, his hands moving with an almost reverent care. "And this ship, Cole, is my studio, 3 days from port. The perfect place for a grand unveiling." The metallic scent, I now realized, wasn't just blood. It was the faint, acrid tang of chemicals, of volatile compounds being mixed, of something brewing, something dangerous. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't just a killer. He was a mad scientist, using the city's underworld as his personal laboratory, and I had walked right into his masterpiece. The air grew heavy, charged with an unseen energy. The tension in the cargo ship hold, 3 days from port, was no longer just mine. It was his, too, and it was about to break. The acrid bite of chemicals still clung to my tongue, a phantom taste mingling with the metallic tang of something far more primal. My lungs burned with each ragged breath, the stale air of the cargo ship hold, 3 days from port thick and suffocating. The confrontation had been a blur of motion and desperation, a dance on the knife's edge between life and oblivion. Now stillness settled, heavy and absolute, broken only by the groan of the ship against the indifferent sea. I pushed myself up, my limbs protesting with a symphony of aches. The scene before me was a tableau of chaos, a testament to the storm that had just passed. Shattered glass glittered like scattered diamonds on the grimy deck, reflecting the harsh, utilitarian light of the ship's emergency lamps. The air, once heavy with the promise of imminent destruction, now hummed with the quiet aftermath, the lingering scent of ozone and something else, regret. Beside me, the figure I had wrestled with, the architect of this elaborate terror, lay still. The carefully constructed facade had crumbled, revealing the desperate, broken man beneath. His eyes, wide and unseeing, stared up at the skeletal ribs of the ship's hull, a silent accusation. There were no grand pronouncements, no final, villainous monologue, just the quiet, stark reality of his defeat. My gaze drifted to the scattered vials and beakers, the remnants of his twisted ambition. The metallic scent, I now realized, wasn't just blood. He was a mad scientist, using the city's unsuspecting populace as his petri dish. The meticulous planning, the chilling precision, it all made a horrific kind of sense now. He wasn't seeking notoriety, he was seeking results. A colleague, his face grim and etched with exhaustion, approached cautiously. He surveyed the scene, his eyes lingering on the inert form on the deck, then on the scattered scientific paraphernalia. "I got him, Cole," he said, his voice a low rumble devoid of triumph. It was the voice of a man who had seen too much, who understood the cost. I merely nodded, my throat tight. Getting him wasn't the victory it should have been. The ghosts of the past, the faces I couldn't save, whispered in the corners of my mind, their silence a deafening roar. This man, this scientist, had replicated the signature of the killer I'd hunted, the one who had slipped through my fingers, leaving a trail of devastation. But he hadn't just mimicked the methods, he had amplified them, twisted them into something even more insidious. I walked over to a discarded notebook, its pages water-stained and warped. With trembling fingers, I opened it. It was a blueprint for chaos, a testament to a mind that saw humanity as little more than a variable in a grand, destructive experiment. He was planning more, I added, my voice hoarse. Much more. The colleague knelt beside me, his gaze fixed on the open pages. "We'll figure it out. We'll trace his network, dismantle it piece by piece." But it wasn't just about dismantling a network. The failure to catch the original killer had been a scar that never healed, a constant reminder of my own inadequacy. This man, in his warped brilliance, had forced me to confront that failure, to chase the shadow of my past. I looked out at the vast, indifferent expanse of the ocean. The ship, a behemoth of steel and industry, was a temporary haven, a temporary end. Soon we would dock, and the grim reality of the cleanup would begin. But for me, the true resolution lay not in the arrest, but in the quiet understanding that had settled within my own soul. The fear, the self-recrimination, the gnawing doubt, they hadn't vanished, but they had receded. They were no longer the dominant force. I remembered the look in the killer's eyes, not of defiance, but of a profound, almost pathetic loneliness. He had sought to impose order on a world he felt was chaotic, to prove his superiority through destruction. And in a twisted way, he had succeeded in arousing something in me too, a dormant fire rekindled by the ashes of his ambition. The colleague clapped a hand on my shoulder, a gesture of solidarity. "It's over, Cole." I met his gaze, a flicker of something akin to peace in my own. "For now," I replied, the words tasting like the salt spray that would soon greet us. The journey ahead was still long. The scars of this case would remain, but the phantom scent of chemicals and blood no longer held the same power. I had faced the monster, and in doing so, I had found a measure of myself. The city was safe for now, and that, I realized, was enough. For today, it was enough.